OK, so it's another crowd at a railway station. Except that this crowd isn't even going anywhere.
You'll be back here at the, well, roughly, that Uni Chapel.
This is Woking 150, an event to celebrate 150 years of the London South Western Railway. Everyone was delighted, well, fairly delighted, to pay homage to the old days, to steam in particular, even if it just shunted back and forth. "60,000 people came to record the past, each in their own style, with or without a child to make the task that much easier. As for children, who may or may not want to become engine drivers these days, they could get to grips with simple, non-electronic joys. Once upon a time, Barry Smith was a small boy, fascinated by trains, and he too queued to see a piece of the past he used to know so well. The high spot of his early life was the annual holiday, by steam, of course, down to Devon, of which the journey was the very best part of all.
Well, I've come here today because it's the first time that I've seen so many Southern steam engines since they went in, 21 years ago, 1967. It really is a marvellous sight. It's working steam engines here. Most of them are Southern Railway, in the Southern region. And I'm amazed, actually, there are so many people here today. I mean, there are literally thousands and thousands. It's absolutely marvellous. I must admit, I never thought I'd see the day again when I see so many Southern Railway engines. Lovely sight. It all brings it all back, quite honestly. It's absolutely fabulous. Of course, one of the great attractions for me here today is the City of Wells, and that is running on a steam special from Salisbury down to Yeovil in the next 2 or 3 weeks. That should be hauling it. It should be a lovely sight. I'm looking forward to that.
Life on the ocean wave today is life on the same old jam-packed 832, and it's possible not to see the romance of a railway terminus. But the railway terminus has seen it all. The comings and goings, the partings, the sweet sorrow, as well as the fairly miserable sorrow, and all the other kinds. For the young Barry Smith, it was all joy. And his particular heaven started at Waterloo, where the Southern Railway began its journeys to the coast for holidays when the sun always shone throughout the stay.
Well, there we are, Waterloo Station. Things have changed a lot since I was here 40 years ago. No steam, very little noise, plenty of people still. The fabric's still here. Let's have a look. Waterloo, it's an incredible place now, I think, and you could virtually eat a meal off the floor. It's so clean, and it's more or less like a supermarket. I mean, you walk in here and look around. You can go and get some spectacles over there. You can have those made while you wait. And you can walk down there and buy a pair of underpants. Full chemist over there. I mean, selling everything under the sun. You've got fast food all the way around here. You can have a meal, you can go and sit down there and have a drink. I mean, the whole thing's changed so completely. I like it. Yes, I do. I like Waterloo now.
It's important to remember the rivalry of the old lines and how the London and South Western Railway listed its destinations much like battle honours in some war. For those of us today, it is a bit odd that you can go to the southwest either via the southern from Waterloo or the western from Paddington. But it was a war in a way, with both sets of tracks capturing new land, awkwardly meeting at Exeter, and then conquering different parts of Cornwall. For Barry Smith and all the others, 11 a.m. was the famous hour when the Atlantic Coast Express pulled out of Waterloo. There are still small Barry Smiths today, still hooked on trains even if they are just diesel, and still getting down the numbers. So will they become sentimental about the old days, the late 1980s, when they grow up and trains no longer look as they do today?
One didn't have a worry in the world then. But I'd like to go back knowing what I do now, and then have another go at it, just to see if it's at all possible. I have my doubts, actually, because we don't have the steam, although there's going to be some steam further down the line. It'll be exciting, without a doubt, because all the various places that used to have engine sheds for a start, I don't know what's there now. It's going to be an exciting journey, yes. I'm going to look forward to it, I think.
Past 9 Elms for a start, now all fruit and veg, and it used to be railway sheds. So will this nostalgic journey work, this attempt to relive a little of the past with so much change? Gantries without the old signals, and rain instead of sun. Ah well, there's always Ian Allen, and the Trainman's Bible, which he wrote.
Yes, Ian Allen, his ABCs, I mean, they really were marvellous. Very, very difficult to get hold of in the war. In fact, they were a ration. You really had to know somebody to get hold of one of these. I've kept them all. I've still got them to this day with all my original numbers in and such like, and I occasionally look at them as well, and I find them fascinating reading. Nowadays you can go down to Exeter and back in a day, and you don't think anything of it really, but in those days it was a huge adventure. So you started off from Waterloo with all that atmosphere of Waterloo, and it was a whole day's trip. It took a long, long time to get there. It wasn't until tea time. Whereas nowadays, I say people go off every weekend now, but when I was a child, it was the one holiday in the year, really. It was an adventure, yes, without a doubt. You didn't really know what you were going to see, quite honestly. It was all new. Even though you'd done it in the past several times, it was still all very, very new. You used different things to look at, and there was always things to see. This was the great thing. Plenty of railways and plenty of locos all over the place.
Past proper signals in the old days, and full steam ahead for the first stop out of Waterloo for Salisbury. For the young Barry, it was all quite magnificent.
Salisbury was a lovely place because virtually in those days everything changed engines there. So you got sort of two engines the price of one, shall we say. One came off and another one came on. And a lot of those engines were for Exmouth Junction. And the Exmouth Junction engines in those days didn't work through to Waterloo. So they were quite rare engines. So it was a lovely place. There was plenty of smoke and steam and noises and all sorts of things there. And of course, everything stopped there.
So what's left of the past? Well, there's still the old water tank which supplied the thirsty engines. The coaches are still parked as formerly, and the station entrance smacks of that different age. And so do other bits and pieces scattered here and there from a period when there seemed to be more time to make such things as pleasing arches. But for those making the excursion, there's nothing a station can provide quite so attractive as a locomotive. Although, horror upon horrors, this proved not to be the City of Wales as had been promised, but an alien machine from quite another line.
It was a shame, really, because there was the City of Wales at Woking. I've been all behind it years and years ago, and I was most disappointed to find that it wasn't running. And also, of course, it wasn't a Southern Railway engine, or ex-Southern Railway engine. We're talking about this LMS goods engine. It wasn't even a passenger engine. So, quite honestly, I was horrified when I saw that. It's still steam, I know, but to me, it wasn't quite right.
Be that as it may, Salisbury was, and is, the gateway to further west, even if the LMS, for heaven's sake, was on the Southern. But this was emphatically phase 2 of the sentimental journey, out of Salisbury and onwards to the west.
I suppose when I stood on Clapham Junction that day back in 1967 and saw the last steam trains on the Southern, I never really thought I'd travel west of Salisbury behind a steam loco. And yet here we are today. Okay, we've got the wrong engine. It's an 8F, a Stanier 8F, which never ever came onto this section of line. I've been back through my records and I can't find one at all. Been into Salisbury and they came up to Templecombe, of course, on the Somerset and Dorset. But actually on this stretch of line, I think we could say that this is unique. Nevertheless, it's steam. You know, I mustn't complain too much. We haven't got that lovely noise of a bully up at the front there, which we used to have. We haven't got that lovely hooter. Lovely bullied hooter. We've got a Stanier.
Bullid is from Oliver Bullid, the famous railway engineer, as against the Stanier of Sir William Stanier, also famous railway engineer, and both men made certain their hooters weren't the same.
But of course, things have changed outside here, outside the window, where the telephone wires. And if you look outside here, there's nothing at all. Dipping, and up they went, down and up and down. But the smells, yes, I mean, that doesn't change at all. It's good coal, plenty of smoke, smuts in your eyes if you're not very careful. So we've got all that back, and that was part of childhood. I don't know about going back 40 years, but I've gone back quite a few years in this today, yes. Yes, that smell, that was the joy. I always envied the firemen in those days. I'd love to have been an engine fireman, I really would. Family wouldn't let me, this is the trouble. A friend of mine 2 doors away, he was a locomotive fireman, but parental pressures, unfortunately, prevented me from doing that. But I wouldn't mind having a go up front now, behind this Stanier. It's back-breaking work, absolutely, shoveling coal. But I mean, in those days, they did it hour after hour, ton after ton they were shoveling. Tremendous job it must have been. But nowadays, I mean, when steam came back again, they in fact had to have 2 firemen. One just couldn't cope with shoveling the coal, which is not surprising, because they were just sitting down most of their working lives. Whereas now they've suddenly got to shovel coal, so of course it was very, very hard work. going back to those old days, it must have been absolutely horrendous up in the front there, because there was the noise, there was a continuous vibration, swaying about, trying to keep your foot, and also trying to shovel coal in through that fairly small fire hole door. When you're doing about 70 or 80 miles an hour and you've got to shovel a ton an hour, it's very, very small. I'd love to have done it, I must admit. I wish I'd had the chance.
Can't have been any easier inside the tunnels, when smoke, smuts, vibrations, speed and darkness were all part of the job. For those today who long for steam, they should try and remember the tunnels when smoke became a sorry substitute for nice fresh air. After Yeovil, in the old days, would come branch line country on the southern, with many connections leading to the sea, practically all of which have gone today. So far as the steam excursion was concerned, Yeovil was now the end of the line, causing yet another change of trains. Only this time, for Barry Smith trying to find the past, it was back to diesel and modern times. But at least there was a line and a train of sorts to carry him on his nostalgic voyage. For the young Barry, Yeovil and Dorset with Devon still to come was simply more excitement.
I think we're very fortunate actually to be travelling on this line, because if one looks at the beaching proposals and on the maps, there's going to be nothing west of Salisbury. There's a regular service, of course, from Waterloo to Exeter, but it's a shame really, because we've got so much single track here now. Beaching had to come about, there's no doubt about it. If it wasn't beaching, it would have been somebody else. It was a shame for the enthusiasts, of course, because we lost out. All these lovely branch lines all went, but coming to reality, which I think one has to do, it had to come about.
And what came about was the closing of branch lines as to Lyme Regis from Axminster. But of course the closing of each branch meant its connecting junction was that much less busy. So no longer do trains puff up and down from Lyme Regis as they used to do.
You've got the Lyme Regis branch, which in fact is frequently worked by just one coach and an engine. So you've got straight away a staff of 3. And then of course you have the stations which were fully staffed with station master and ticket collector and porter. And of course there was signalman all the way down the line. The track itself was maintained virtually to mainline standards, in excellent condition. And looking all round, it was quite tremendous, the amount of staff that they had on these lines. So really, it was no wonder that they went to the wall, because it's only in the summer, it was a branch like the Lyme Regis branch, fully worked.
At Axminster, it's no longer all change for Lyme Regis. It's just get off if you want Axminster, and the car you left in its car park, and the town, and of course the carpet factory, or a bit more travelling. Fenniton used to be Sidmouth Junction before they cut off the line to Ottery and Sidmouth. Now it's just Fenniton. And memories, as for Alan Powell, who works here in the family tradition.
My grandfather was a signalman here back in the last century, and I had an uncle who was signalman here, not my father, but then I took on in the 1950s. When I joined, I counted up a total of about 16 altogether. Station master, 3 signalmen, 2 booking clerks, 2 shunters, a couple of crossing keepers, and 4 of us on the platform. Not all on at once, of course. People would come in from all the villages, 3 or 4 miles around, to get trains away. And it was very much a railhead, so it was really lively then. On a summer Saturday, you would probably have a train going through about every quarter of an hour, some of them stopping, some not. And of those that stopped, you had connections to the branch line to Sidmouth and Exmouth, quite busy generally. But now, of course, it's a very scaled down sort of operation. We get about half the trains that go through stopping here. We cater for a steady trickle of passengers, not a flood these days.
First stop on the branch line was the station, now gone, for the market town of Ottery St Mary. Well, Ottery still lives, but not its old railway line leading either to Sidmouth or Budleigh Salterton.
The closures had to come sometime because there was so much opposition from the bus services, and there was a very good bus service between Ottery and Exeter and Axminster, that it was a foregone conclusion. And with the goods traffic gone from the station, I mean, that was, you understand, that was took up by the road transport system, which was cheaper, more economical, and the trains seemed to get so far behind with their service that it was foregone. There was a lot of controversy and a lot of sympathy for the railway, but and the council, I was on the town council, urban council at that time, and there was a lot of talk, and in fact there was meetings held with the railways and the bus services to say how many buses was going to connect up with the railways, and you'd have a marvellous service to Ottery St Mary and such like, but never came about. I mean, these promises was never carried out.
So what about those branches? Jeff Vinter of the Railway Ramblers.
Unfortunately, because the railways were in a very difficult financial circumstance when these closures took place, the lines were sold off, sometimes for very small sums of money, without any view to their reuse whatsoever. So nowadays, the land is in a very fragmented state. If 25 years ago we had had a coordinated policy for the reuse of these abandoned railway lines, we could have ended up with a fabulous network of green lanes suitable for cyclists, walkers, interconnecting all over the country. You will have been in a position where, for example, you might have travelled to somewhere like Barnstaple, walked out to Ilfracombe or Bideford, Torrington. Walking down old railway lines is like passing through a gateway into a lost way of life, into a past world when lives were regulated not so much by getting things done as fast as possible, but by the measured coming and going of the branch line train. You find yourself in cuttings hewn out by sweat and toil with pick and axe, which have now become private nature reserves, unknown to all but the few people like us who pass through them. Walking down an old railway line isn't just a matter of striding out with 6 or 7 friends and hoping for the best. You've got to get involved in finding out who owns the land, tracking them down, getting permission, and all the rest of it. So it's quite a major undertaking. It can involve a lot of letter writing, or perhaps travelling around actually knocking on doors. In itself, that's quite interesting. It becomes extremely so if you should knock on the door of an old station and discover, for example, that the former station master still lives there.
For the young Barry Smith, unaware that a Dr. Beeching and hard times for the railways were both looming, the impending arrival of Exeter held an excitement which had nothing to do with its cathedral, but everything to do with the majesty of its loco shed.
Oh, Exmouth Junction. Now that really was a shed. I love Nine Elms and of course Salisbury, but Exmouth Junction had a ring about it, I think, Exmouth Junction, because you could see the whole yard as you went by on the train, and of course trains were beginning to slow down then because you were getting close to Exeter. You didn't roar past at 60 or 70 miles an hour and see nothing. And there were lines of engines, everything. So it was a lovely place, gorgeous building.
It was at Exeter that the two competing railway lines, the one from Waterloo and the other one from Paddington, met and still do meet. And on Barry Smith's journey, Exeter Central was the place for finding yet another train.
Of course, here at Exeter Central, I changed trains here to get the branch line down to Exmouth in this bay here, which I don't think is used anymore now for the branch line trains. But the great thing, of course, about this branch is that it still survives. It's the only surviving branch off the main line now from Waterloo to Exeter. All the others have gone. Well, after this station, of course, it'll be the end of the line, Exmouth. I don't know what I'm going to find there. There's a station there, but what sort of station, I just can't imagine. We'll soon find out anyway. It doesn't take all that long to go down the line.
Well, the River Exe may still be there, but the old M7 tank engines have long since vanished from this lovely piece of line.
Exmouth Station was a lovely little station. I honestly can't remember the full details of it, but it seemed, if I remember, there was about 3 platforms, and of course it had an engine shed, which is always an attraction in itself. It was a very small one-road engine shed which housed the loco off the branch. It was, a busy station. I think it must have been freight because there were goods yards there, so there was obviously a freight service in there bringing coal and such like. It was a lovely little station. I just hope that it hasn't been altered too much. Well, here we are, journey's end, Exmouth, sunny Exmouth. But what a lot of changes. Engine shed's gone, the yard's gone, the station's gone, lovely station, gone. When I came here, it was never like this, for a start, pouring with rain. I don't think it was. It was always sunny, glorious Devon. I mean, this was the adverts in those days. It was gorgeous.
Apart from its wonderful stretch of coastline, golden beaches and clear blue seas, Exmouth has a lovely river.
I would call it a disaster, quite honestly. I mean, I'm absolutely appalled at what they've done to this station. No, it's not I don't think it's a good experience at all, quite honestly. I don't think I'd recommend this to anybody to come back. I think I prefer to remember it as I did 40 years ago, with the smell of steam and as it was.
As we take our last look at Exmouth and remember our journey through the Raleigh country, pride mingles with regret and having to leave it all too soon.
The Isle of Man is a bit of an oddity. It's set squarely in the middle of the British Isles and yet forms no part of Great Britain. It isn't even part of the United Kingdom, and yet our monarch is also the Lord of Man. You can trundle along the Douglas Promenade in a horse-drawn tram, and you can arrive on the Isle of Man on board one of the most modern of jets. You can come there because you like its taxation system and lack of death duties, or you can come as a tourist to get rid of a little of your money. As one more oddity, it has still got steam. But whether you're there for the offshore finance or the blend of old and new, or because it's a change from Blackpool and Morecambe and has the romance of being an island with everybody in the old days, such as the Vikings having to come by boat, it's now famous for some because of its railways. It isn't a very big island, being only some 30 miles long, but the railways have played an important part in its history and commerce, and now nostalgia and tourism. You might have thought that such an island with its independence and unique government and craggy scenery would have wanted nothing to do with such things as trains, but not a bit of it. The steam railways crossed the island, high ground permitting, but then vanished, first from Ramsey and then from Peel. However, there is still Douglas to Port Erin. As with almost everywhere, the roads have taken the load the railways used to bear. And the railway buildings might seem no more than a front, like ancient castles telling of former times, of the days of steam. But behind them, there is still steam, blowing its trumpet in a manner it alone can do.
It's one of the most unique transport systems in the British Isles, if not the whole of Europe. Not only have you got a modern bus service, which you've got everywhere, of course, but you've got this unique vintage railway system, which dates back until 1870s in certain cases. The electric railway, the steam railway, the Snaefell Mountain Railway, marvellous systems, all completely different, all with their own type of image, their own atmosphere, and it's that type of thing which really is a boyhood dream, I suppose, to be in charge of running such an enterprise.
Well, firstly, is it a tramway? Is it a railway? But it's certainly the Isle of Man. And the Isle of Man was very much ahead of the times, for the Douglas and Laxey Coast Electric Tramway started in 1893. London didn't get its first electric trams until this century, in 1901, and Birmingham 1903, or 10 years after the Manx Company had shown the way, and so excitingly. The island is not short of contours, and the construction of its tramway was a sort of challenge that appealed to the supremely confident Victorians who seemed to prefer the problems caused by all that mountain scenery. But they didn't only push their trams into the glens, they did the same with steam. And this steam, having fallen into disrepair, was then lovingly restored by, among others, Tony Beard.
Years ago we were volunteers working on the steam railway, and when it was nationalised we found that we were no longer required. So we still wanted to do something in railway preservation, and so we decided to restore this Manx Glen Railway.
I suppose one disadvantage of train sets is that they aren't big enough. They're not quite the real thing. But this certainly is, and has been, off and on, since 1893. Built originally in Stafford and then restored by apprentices at Sellafield, Sealand is now 95 years old and will plainly hit a century, or maybe two. They don't work her too hard, but it's usual to get her in steam on summer Sunday mornings to pull another load of tourists. And that, strangely, is what this particular railway was always designed to do. There was never any more serious business than taking a bunch of tourists along a length of line and then bringing them back again. So it's now business as usual along Groudle Glen, thanks to the Isle of Man Steam Railway Supporters Association. The railway was closed for World War II, closed again in 1960, and then reopened for passengers in 1985. Everyone who works here is a volunteer. Ron Cooper, ticket seller, usually works in an office. Colin Kelly, guard, works in a brewery, and the driver of the train, Kevin Lewin, is a storeman.
Well, this is a marvellous example of some Victorian engineer who decided to develop a glen and build a 2-foot gauge narrow gauge railway, 3/4 of a mile long, to serve a zoo where there were sea lions and polar bears, hence the name of the 2 locomotives that served the line for many years. It's supposed to be a hobby, but it's nearly turning out to be a full-time job. But it's very, very enjoyable. Every minute I spend down here is totally enjoyable. I know I speak that for everybody who comes down. Total commitment, and it's good fun. And to see people's faces travelling on the trains, and you see them enjoying themselves as a result of your efforts, makes it all worthwhile. That's what I like about it.
Journeys end with lots of bracing sea air, and you can tell it's an English summer because so many are wearing anoraks. In the old days, there was more to this headland station than just a headland. The engine had been called Sea Lion because it used to call at the sea lions. And down there at the end of the last century, someone had built a zoo with sea lions and polar bears, and bits of the old cages still remain. Today, you just have to look, take deep breaths of air, and imagine what it must have been like when you could stroll across the bridge and look down and across at the animals. It isn't typical polar bear country, but perhaps a touch nearer than Regent's Park. Anyway, the place attracted 100,000 visitors in its first 3 months, and they had to run 40 trains a day. It was one of the sights to be seen before it was time for everyone to be back on the coaches and then back down the glen. But there's still, as it were, a proper railway that's a touch more intercity than just going to a zoo. The Isle of Man railways still exist, with Douglas being the major station, and they are still in steam.
We are a full-time employer. The railway doesn't run with volunteer labour, so all our staff are very flexible. The majority of them can do at least 2 jobs, and a lot of them 3 or 4 jobs. So the trains that are running now, with the drivers and firemen and guards, in the winter they are switched on to the maintenance of track and vehicles. And the full-time engineering staff also turn out in the summer to work extra duties on the traffic, and between the lot of them we keep the whole job going.
The staff are excellent on the Isle of Man railways. We have a very flexible staff. They go from making springs from the locomotives, painting, doing traffic work, being a guard, a station master, a ticket collector, all sorts of things each person's expected to do, and they do it well. You see, they've got a vocation that's important. They care about the railway, and without them we wouldn't have an Isle of Man steam railway.
The Isle of Man Railway, built on a 3-foot gauge, started work in 1873, and the first steam engine was number 1. But number 13 is no chicken, having entered service in 1910. Not only still going strong, but also, it would appear, shining no less brightly after the passage of almost 8 decades. course, the line was busier in the old days, but with some of those engines still working, there's a great feeling of continuity between then and now. But with one difference, that the platforms still had their canopies in the old days. The surviving length of track runs from Douglas to Port Erin, about a dozen miles as a crow might make the journey, but nearer 20 by steam. So steam lives, but only goes to Port Erin in the summertime, when there are more visitors to use and see this whiff of the past. Steam trains have now been running on this line for 114 years. First to Port Sodric, then Santon and Ballasalla and Castletown and Ballabeg and Colby and Port St Mary. And finally to Port Erin, which, under a clear blue sky, can look most magical. The connection between Port Erin and Douglas has had its hiccups, notably in the 1960s when lines were being closed with such enthusiasm. But the old signs were not taken down and are now useful all over again.
Could you run right onto the empty stop? The first memory must have been looking out of the window of the Martins Bank house where we used to live, eagerly awaiting the arrival of whatever train was on its way in and wondering whether it was my father or grandfather who'd be driving.
Mike Buttle's father on the left and grandfather Buttle on the right. In fact, the grandfather retired 3 times and was called back twice because they couldn't replace him. But it was Mike's father, mainly, who gave him a love of steam and who helped to make this a 4th-generation railway family, one just as long-lasting as the trains they served.
The smell of the railway was with us over in Bank House all of the time. With living more or less on top of the railway, we used to get the smell of the steam drifting into the house, and there was always the smell of my father's overalls lying around the place. The station building itself is undoubtedly the most beautiful building in Port Erin. It's red brick construction. It was built by a local firm of builders in the early years of the century. It's all done on a theme. The decoration over the station windows and doors is also in the barge boards on the top of the roof. There's this carved arch that's reflected throughout the whole building.
I think only a true fanatic would say that Port Erin's railway station is the most beautiful building in town. But you need that kind of enthusiasm if the virtues of the past are not to be swept aside in pursuit of modernity.
Inside in the booking office, what we're trying to do is recreate the sort of feel of the place as it must have looked between 1910 and, say, 1920. You can see we've got a lot of the original posters we've rescued from various stations along the line.
And that means everything is a touch old-fashioned, like the tickets and politeness.
No, these are return tickets.
Oh, fine. Thank you.
Thank you. To Douglas. Right.
Could you have your tickets ready, please? Thank you. Thank you.
The satisfaction really comes from the whole job, from seeing the loco coming out in the morning, nice and clean, and the passengers rolling up for their tickets and smiles on their faces as they go off for their day out. Then seeing another train full of people coming back in. It's having to deal with the people, having to deal with the crews, and any problems that may come up during the day. It is a very satisfying experience, and it's one that I take a great amount of pride in. Thank you. Okay, thank you. All the little engines have their own little personalities, and I look forward to seeing them coming in, and the different makeups of the trains, the rolling stock, whatever order it's in that particular day. There's always something interesting to find going on.
A commuter in, for example, southern England might wonder if this is modern times at all, and when he last had a door opened for him.
Well, occasionally during the summer, I suppose my mother wanted to get rid of me for the day. I'd be bundled off with my father and taken off to Douglas on the engine. Of course, we'd never start off on the engine at Port Erin. Mr. Nelson wouldn't have approved of that sort of thing. But as soon as we got into Port St Mary, you get out of the guard's van on the blind side of Mr. Corkish, who was the station master there, and climb into the loco cab and set off towards Douglas. And it was always a marvellous feeling to be in the footplate with them. One of the things I can remember is that they used to keep their tea in these enamel pots with wire handles hanging from the lamp brackets on the back plate of the boiler, and keep the tea hot for the journey into Douglas. And we'd run in through Colby and Castletown, and then cross the other train at Ballasalla, and tucked into the corner of the cab there, you'd be out of the sight of the station masters, and so you'd be all right.
It would be easy to think that the young Mike Buttle didn't have to bother with a train set at home when there were real trains to play with, Dad and Grandad permitting.
And at Port Sodrick station, it was a case of having to get off the loco and back into the guard's van. It wouldn't have done to be seen by Mr. Kelly in Douglas, or worse still, the general manager, Mr. Sheard, whose office was on the corner of the administrative buildings. He had like a protruding bay window, and he could look out onto the platforms and over the goods yard and see all that was going on. And of course, if I'd been seen getting off the footplate in Douglas, then my father would have been in serious trouble, and probably up to Mr. Sheard's office in double quick time.
But apart from the task of keeping the young Buttle out of sight, there was coaling to be done, and also maintenance of the engines, which were getting on in age even then.
On the approach to Douglas station, there used to be a big double gantry signal on the side of the workshops. That's no longer there. I was always bundled off to the signal box to sit with Bobby Tate, who was a great old boy. He's the signalman at Douglas, and he'd always have a brew of hot tea on, and I can remember sitting there talking to Bobby. He'd always get a cup of tea in one of these old enamel mugs. It was steaming hot, so hot you could hardly hold it. And he'd sit and talk about the other two great loves of his life. He used to breed budgies and make model boats, and spent quite a few happy occasions up with good old Bobby.
But budgies and model boats permitting, there was always lots to do at Douglas, as it was a busy railhead before the closures came. Both Peel and Ramsey were then connected.
Trains heading out from Douglas towards Peel and Ramsey would always be double-headed. The Peel and the Ramsey section would make up the train. When the train would arrive at St John's, it would be split into two sections. And the loco that brought the train up from Peel to St John's would take the train back down into Peel. The Ramsey loco would continue on the run up to Ramsey. St John's station was really the hub of the island railway system. At one time you could get trains out to Ramsey, to Peel, back into Douglas and down to the little mining village of Foxdale. It was always great fun when two trains used to leave St John's at the same time, one bound for Peel and one for Ramsey. Officially they were supposed to leave within 2 minutes of each other, but quite often the crews would hang about and they would race each other out of the station. As I remember, the Peel train always used to win the race because it was going downhill. But it was always great fun to be sitting in one of the carriages of one train and watching the other train go away into the distance. You could always tell the approach to the peel station because the smell of the fish factories and the kipper works would come up from Peel to greet you before you were actually in the village itself. Peel station was situated right on the harbour, really picturesque setting on a sunny day. If we went down to Peel, we used to take a picnic with us and go and sit on the grass over by Peel Castle and watch the trains come in and out. It was a sad day when the Peel service finished in 1968.
The trains may vanish, but not all the names or even all the buildings, such as the stations themselves, and this one is now a fisherman's cooperative.
This is Glenwillan Viaduct. There used to be a pleasure ground underneath which was owned and operated by the railway company. There was a little cafe and amusement arcade and boating pool. All the crockery was printed with the railway company crest. It was a nice little place, Glenwillan.
It's nice to remember the old days and what a viaduct used to look like, but keeping an aged railway going with aging locomotives and aging rolling stock is a major problem for, among others, Traffic Superintendent Graham Warhurst.
With the vehicles, it's really the age of them, particularly the wooden-bodied coaches, and we're now finding, as well as needing constant attention, the older ones, and I'm talking of coaches that have been in service for 100, 105 years, are now requiring major bodywork attention.
Yes, major bodywork attention, and a considerable task for craftsman David Maddox.
Well, you get a wreck like this comes in, when it goes out, it's as good as new. That's the satisfaction. Well, this coach here was being used the past about 10 years anyway down the sea terminal. It's a tourist information centre and leaflets selling tickets for the railways. It's in a bad state, but about 6 months' time it'll be running again, and it's going to be around probably longer than I will.
There was nothing plastic about the old coaches, and so nothing plastic about the renovation, just good mahogany. And there's also nothing about the workshop that smacks of very modern times. It's more like industrial archaeology, with the old machines still doing the same old job. What was good enough for the Industrial Revolution still keeps the wheels turning for the Isle of Man railways and provides the power for Colin Goldsmith to do his new job. He used to be an electrician.
I've had to learn a completely new trade, really, and I've enjoyed a great deal of satisfaction from that, and knowing that I've been able to do that. Having, should we say, learned to do a reasonable amount of boiler making, should we say, in respect of fitting in tubes, things like that. We're carrying out this work now. We've just done a reasonable amount of restaying. It's just been retubed, given that we'll probably have to retube every 8 or 9 years. Apart from that, we would like to be thinking of reaching 25 years perhaps service out of this boiler, and likewise out of the other 3 boilers.
Well, you might expect boilers to need retubing, but what about springs breaking? They've still got to be put right, and you can't buy them off the shelf any more than you can buy the engines. So, self-sufficiency is the keynote. And remember what they used to do, and what they did it with, and how they used the tools in those good old engineering days when, if you wanted something, it was up to you to make it.
Mainly, it's a job where there aren't any hard and fast rules. You've got to make a lot of your rules up as you go along. If you work in a factory, everything is laid down for you and you work exactly as you're told to work. Here, as I say, you've got to make a lot of your own equipment and a lot of fabrication and a bit of ingenuity as well. I'm not really a steam fanatic, but it does give me a kick, you know, to see a bit of my own work. It doesn't really matter that it is a steam engine. It could be any other old piece of machinery. These things have to be preserved. And, well, I'm lucky I'm in a job where I'm doing that sort of thing. The satisfaction that I get is in, well, innovation, call it, using modern materials to make replacement items for the old engines, but using the techniques and equipment that the old timers used.
Brown Crossfield blacksmith, new springs for old, and the satisfaction of a good job well done. But so too with the railway system as a whole, and keeping this piece of the old days alive in modern times. It's that which is the task of the Chief Executive, Robert Smith.
We have people coming long distances to see the railway, and although we seek cost efficiencies and we can give value for money, the railway must still survive in its present form if we're to attract the people as a tourist island. My job is to see that the railway steadily improves so that it's here for my son's generation, my grandson's generation. So into the next century, the Isle of Man Steam Railway will still be here.
These people have travelled here overnight from all parts of the country. They've booked their special 75-shilling tickets weeks in advance. Some haven't been able to sleep for the excitement of this 12-hour, 460-mile return journey from Paddington to Birkenhead, because on Western Region, this has been billed as the last day of steam, and there'll now be no excuse for forgetting the glory that was once the GWR. No retired prima donna ever took a curtain call like this.
That particular prima donna was being seen off in the 1960s, and commentators at the time were somewhat sneery about the train buffs, the railway enthusiasts, the spotters who wished to witness and mourn the passing of an age.
Would you like to do anything else but railways?
Yeah, there's girls and horses and, yeah, there's other things, but steam engines are nice. You feel you have to have a steam engine, you know, you've got to have one every now and again. You have to go, all these chaps say the same, they've got to have a steam engine. You might better go for a fortnight without a steam engine, then you've got to go and find one somewhere, you know.
But why can't you do all this with a diesel engine? Why couldn't you clean a diesel?
Well, there's no... I mean, when there's no noise, is it? That thing's got a voice up the front there. It's making a noise. It's speaking. It's a terrific noise. It makes, well, it just makes lovely noises. When it's raising steam, 90 tons of it raising steam, it sings like a kettle, and it's terrific. A lovely thing.
The end of the age of steam? Well, not quite. In June 1965, Clun Castle was the last steam engine to haul a passenger train out of Paddington. In November, Clun Castle was back again to haul another last train out of Paddington. Last weekend, she hauled 2 more last trains, and now the railway enthusiasts are preparing for the next last train. But now, British Rail's patience has been exhausted. From next year, they say, there'll be no more steam trains anywhere. Then, it seems, we'll be in for a train drain.
The villain, with that familiar and reminiscent moustache, was of course Dr. Beeching, who got rid of a third of the network and hastened the end of steam. So far as he and British Rail were concerned, the last steam train ran on August 11th, 1968, with tickets at 15 guineas apiece. In the 10 years up to 1968, a total of 16,000 steam locomotives were withdrawn from active service, with almost all of them ending at the knackers like any other kind of scrap. A very few went to museums or enthusiasts, but it was a great time for scrap. In 1963 alone, 500 locomotives, 4,000 coaches, 130,000 wagons, and 250,000 tons of rail were smashed, broken, and cut up into little pieces, ready for making into something else. Such as diesels and electrics. They were cleaner, easier, cheaper, simpler, but somewhat boring. Like certain caterpillars and worms, both ends even looked very much the same. And most of us began to forget the snags of steam, such as getting red-hot cinders in your eye, and started to think wistfully of old days when coal and steam were king. But the old days still lived after a fashion. One scrap merchant at Barry in South Wales had kept over 200 engines in case his men ever grew short of work. Wagons were easier to break up, and the locos could bide their time and rust. From Di Woodham's point of view, it was good to be at the receiving end of scrap from British Rail.
Government announced that there was to be a £250 million programme to modernise British Rail. And I thought, well, that's a gravy train. I've got to get on it one way or another. And anyway, I was accepted as a man who was allowed to tender, and we never stopped since. As far as railway was concerned, rolling stock, engines, railway lines, so forth. And we have been breaking up British Railways now for nearly 35 years. It took really 140 years to build British Railways, and we'll have literally scrapped it in 30 to 40 years.
Word got around about Di Woodham's scrapyard, and his 200 engines became a place of pilgrimage, not so much for youngsters who see everywhere as potential playground, but for adults who, in the end, bought every single one, whatever its condition.
If you look at some of the engines which have left Barry in the past and are now in full steam, it's a fantastic performance. And this particular example, which is pretty rough, but I forecast that when the preservationists have finished with it, it'll be like the day she was built. Magic. Pure magic.
In 1966, sold for scrap to Di Woodham and waiting for the end, was the express engine Port Line of the Merchant Navy class. Instead, and 16 years later, the rusting machinery was bought by a group intent upon recreating this piece of the past. Such enthusiasm was plainly abnormal and promptly earned stern questioning from a visiting journalist.
Why do you think people are prepared to put in time, effort and spend money to restore an old hulk like this?
It's a funny thing. It's I suppose you could say it's a peculiar British disease, steam railway enthusiasm. It attracts an awful lot of people, and we put a lot of time in, and we've got an awful lot of time to put in over the next 5 or 7 years, depending on the sort of support we can get. But she'll run again, and she'll run very fast.
Initially, and with a police escort, £6,500 worth of engine, weighing some 90 tons, ran very slowly. But number 35027 was on its way. And where to but a field close by the old railway workshops at Swindon. This place used to employ 14,000 people and was the largest such establishment anywhere in Europe. In the old days, it could and did make and repair engines in a most routine fashion. But following the railway closures, most of the workshops went as well, including the famous A shed, where all the Great Western engines have been made. Once again, it was a great time to be in scrap. But a few people were determined to keep a part of Swindon Works alive. The new owners, Tarmac Limited, agreed to the creation of a steam repair centre here. Its first visitor was Port Line, and by early 1988, like any phoenix in the midst of all this carnage, number 35027 was in steam again, 5 years after restoration had begun and after £100,000 had been spent. The amount of work had been prodigious, but But when Port Line stood again, more or less complete, it was a great occasion. On every side was destruction and disrepair, but the thought of a piece of resurrection among so much havoc was great joy to all concerned, notably to Bill Trite, founder of the restoration team.
Well, I think our secret was that we had the right mixture of people. It was partly by chance and partly by design, but it's been necessary to get a group together who are competent mechanically and in engineering terms, also financially, administratively, and for matters of promotion. And I think it's fair to say there's been a dash of vision and unremitting determination to succeed. And all these various diverse factors have come together, and this is the result.
Britain is a curious country. Its paid workers so frequently complain, but volunteers like Willie Bath will work in all weathers, whatever the job. He was in charge of the restoration.
You're organising various, different components to go on it. I mean, you read through the drawings, you ask people, you look at photographs to see what's missing. I mean, it comes as a great shock sometimes when you look around it and you think, God, I didn't even know it had one of those. And you've got to go out and suddenly get a picture of it or a drawing of it. And that won't suffice, of course, till they're machined up. If it needs to be cast, you've got to make a pattern for it. You think, well, maybe you can find if somebody else has one, if it's already been dealt with. That's all very rewarding, but at the same time, it can be very, very dismal. I mean, we've been out in snow drifts, we've been out in the pouring rain, I mean, covered from head to foot in filth, trying to brighten the thing up. We've worked for 5 years without any mains electricity and without any mains water. We have recently, thanks to the good offices of Tarmac, got a cover over our head. And until then, I mean, it's been purgatory. I mean, if you want to boil a cup of tea, you've got to switch all the electric tools off to get the kettle going. It's not all honey and pie. There are days when you just really wish that you could go and do something else. I mean, you can't wait for the pub to open some nights. It's that bad. Okay. The engine does have to be inspected thoroughly at every degree. The boiler inspector, he has to check that the gauges that you have are correct. So he has a master gauge, which he will put on to check that your gauge is not reading wildly inaccurately to give some dangerous problem. Because the truth is, we are all just enthusiastic amateurs. And you've done everything right. You've asked enough people, they've told you exactly what to do, and they've been doing it for years, and you've done it, and you've done it, and they've looked at it, and they've checked it. And then it moves, and you think, oh, well, I always knew it would.
So Port Line moves and had been inspected. But moving up and down a short length of track, however exciting at the time, can suddenly seem most unsatisfactory. So where is a longer length of track, and where better than the Bluebell Railway in Sussex? Its 5 miles of isolated line formed the first length of standard gauge to be saved. Not only were the rails preserved, but everything possible to give visitors a flavour of the old days. And the place has also been a boon for filmmakers whenever the script calls for a steam train to be part of the action. Steam trains are no longer part of normal experience, and young engine drivers of today can wonder where all the soot comes from, even if they don't care how they get rid of it. But the latest attraction is Port Line, in steam once more, with the experts assessing the chances of a trouble-free run, and the restorers also anxious.
It has kept me awake a lot at nights to make sure that the thing is ready and that it's done right. I mean, it's a huge, great big thing. I mean, it's a really powerful machine. I mean, you've got to make sure it's right. And we brought it to the Bluebell here for them to check over with us as well and to make sure that it is right. I spent about 70 hours a week on it, for January, February, March and April, 7 days a week, almost. And I don't know, I mean, there was such an intensity in that. It was in fact good fun, very tired, straight to bed, straight up, straight to work. Just went on and on and on. been such a transformation from its original state that you look forward to be able to do another one because you've been through it all. You know how to get around the jobs. You know the problems you're going to encounter. You know the people to talk to about it. You know the places to get the equipment. The second one has always got to be the easier one, really. And I mean, I look forward to getting on with it.
Be all that as it may, it must be more fun with the finished product and marvelling yet again at the power and glory of steam. And remembering that this huge machine had just been rusting away as scrap. But for Willie Bath, the engine is far more than fire and water and steel. It's a time machine.
It recaptures the only time in your life where you're, I think, old enough to perceive what's going on around you, but you haven't got to worry about it. You don't know whether your parents can pay their mortgage or their rates because they don't bother to tell you, because you're not old enough to understand. So all you know is that your beans on toast are on the table at 6 o'clock. I mean, you just sit there, haven't got a care in the world. 13 years old. What do you know? What do you know is going to happen? It's wonderful those days.
Bringing back an express engine is one undoubted achievement. But the enthusiasm of the restorers doesn't stop there. Why not bring back an entire railway, as in Derbyshire? Buxton in the Peak District is still a part of British Rail, but it's also the starting point of a scheme to reconstruct miles of scrapped main line, with track, signal boxes, trains, the lot. And one of its creators is Martin Ashworth.
It's a tremendous challenge. I think it's part of the British character, really, that the bigger the challenge, more people like to rise to it, really. A lot of preserved railways have taken over redundant lines where the track's already been there, the buildings were there. This is even worse than that. I mean, we've got everything to start from, absolutely everything, rock bottom. As I say, apart from the actual track bed, which is still there. So it's a tremendous challenge, really, and as you overcome each stage, it's very, very satisfying. It's taken us 12 years just to persuade the planners that we're serious, but we refuse to go away. We've come back fighting each time, and now they accept that we are serious. They've looked at what we've done here. We can run trains, we can restore carriages and wagons, locomotives to full working order. We can operate, we can lay track, we can do building work, and, you know, I'm sure we've now convinced the authorities that we are serious. So even that, overcoming sort of, not a prejudice if you like, but an official sort of scepticism of a group of amateurs taking on something of this size, overcoming even that problem is rewarding in itself. But then to go on and overcome all the practical problems, getting an engine out of a scrapyard, restoring it to full working order, restoring an old carriage, vintage carriage or whatever, to working order for the public, laying the track, seeing an old track bed reinstated as a proper working railway again, reinstating an old signal box, this one here behind us, we had to remove from Worksworth in pieces, bring it up here and rebuild it. We found the frame materials at another site, we rebuilt those. So bringing all the pieces together and recreating days gone by, really. So it's very satisfying.
The engine number 1823 and the year it was born. 1924 was the year that this engine was built. It's quite an old...
In a sense, the derided steam buffs have come into their own, for they are now educational, promoting our heritage, assisting tourism, creating jobs, benefiting all down the line, their line.
Well, really, I think showing children around is probably one of the most satisfying of all the jobs we do up here, because a lot of them haven't seen or been on a train. It's surprising, really. Even a diesel haul train, let alone a steam haul train, it's a completely new experience for them. They get a great thrill out of it. So, you know, in turn, this is their enthusiasm for it, for something so new as this, comes over to yourself.
On its way through, holds the water to make steam.
I think recently it has to be said that with Thomas the Tank Engine being revitalised on the television, you know, this has brought steam engines to the attention of a whole new generation of children. You need only put a little face on the front of one of the steam engines and it's immediately becomes Thomas. But you never tire of it really, you know, because of course this is our hobby, you know, and it's our enthusiasm we like to put over to other people and hope that it sort of rubs off on them, that perhaps some of them will join us and become future volunteers, you see. This site is more or less complete. Now, there's another couple of years' work, but it is more or less complete. It is at least functioning as a steam centre. We're at least able to give rides. But what we'd very much like to do now is get out down the track bed and get some serious track laying done.
What the conservers wish to do is to make use of British Rail's first 5 miles out of Buxton, then lay 16 miles of line on an old track bed, and finally meet up with British Rail again at Matlock. Currently, those 5 miles out of Buxton are used for quarry traffic. The quarry traffic will continue, and the conservers may find it necessary to lay their own length of track alongside the existing line.
Well, working south from Buxton, the line goes parallel to the A6 road in what is basically a gorge. The railway moves from one side of the gorge to the other. It crosses the river several times. It's on an embankment 1 minute, through a tunnel the next. It's very, very inspiring scenery down there. The British Railway line turns off up through Great Roxdale. Our line diverges there and goes down through Millersdale. Again, a lovely part of the world. There's a very deep river valley there. The viaducts there are very, very tall, very impressive structures. The remaining part of the track bed, 16 miles or so, is derelict now. The track's all gone. But luckily it's not overgrown. A lot of it has been retained as a bridle path, a walkway for hikers for the summer months. So the track bed is still clear, and we feel we can reinstate the line down there quite easily. My own favourite spot, I think, is the Millersdale area, really. I like the stretch in particular between Blackwell Mill and Millersdale. There's about 2 miles there, and it's very, very nice there with the deep limestone gorge. Very nice. Then on down through Monsaldale. There's quite a nice famous view of Monsaldale. Probably the classic view, really, of the Peak Line, I would have said. Then on down through Bakewell, Longston, Hassop, and then eventually, of course, onto Matlock.
At Matlock, the restored line will meet up again with British Rail. And it's near Matlock, with pick and shovel, as in the old days, that the restorers are making a start in creating the old line once again. The navvies of the 1980s are learning what it was like to make a railway when human muscles did virtually all the work, and nothing has got any lighter.
Okay, touch more, Andy.
There's an old saying on the railways, the lightest thing was the pay packet, and it's a fact that everything you touch on a standard gauge railway scheme is heavy. Laying track, each 60-foot length of track weighs a tonne, so it needs quite a lot of you to get round using rail tongs to actually put the piece of rail in position. It's all heavy work, there's no two ways about it. So we certainly can understand how the old navvies used to be. I suppose we have one upon them in the sense that they have provided the actual railway line itself for us. All we are doing now is pushing the track back. We're replacing walls, ballasting, this sort of thing, which is quite small beer compared to what they had to put up with 100 odd years ago. They had to hew the whole railway out of solid rock. If somebody works in an office during the week, they might like to get out on the track laying gang at the weekends, which gives them a release from their normal sort of day-to-day work. And vice versa, somebody who's doing a manual job may care to take on some of the commercial work, this sort of thing. So we provide a vast variety of tasks and interests within the railway itself.
It will undoubtedly be a formidable labour. But up at Bowness, by the Firth of Forth, they have already done it. The Scottish Railway Preservation Society moved in on a piece of wasteland and turned it into a railway system, a living museum, a showpiece of the days of steam, entirely to the liking of a volunteer driver such as John Burney, one of the new-style museum attendants. Whether an express train or a goods engine, the appeal of steam is much the same.
It's a very basic kind of machine. There's nothing subtle about a steam engine. You take these basic elemental forces like fire and a bit of water, make it into steam, and there's nothing like the feeling of power you get. I remember the first time I stood in a steam engine and the driver opened the throttle and it moved, and there's nothing like it. It's magnificent. In the early 60s, when the modernisation programme was happening very quickly and steam was being eclipsed very quickly all over Britain, not just Scotland, there were growing lines of scrap or to-be scrap steam engines standing in sidings up and down the country. I would love to have had my own steam engine. And in fact, you could buy one in those days. £500 would have bought you a steam engine. So it's all my father's fault because he wouldn't spend the money.
It wasn't just fathers who wouldn't spend the money. If anything was to be kept, it usually went ever so cheaply into an ordinary museum. But a few escaped this net and went on running.
I remember there were 4 of them which were restored by BR in 1958 and 59, which were used in enthusiast specials all over the Scottish region. And I remember all of these engines at one time or another, either by travelling behind them or by watching them. It was a splendid sight. There was nothing quite equal these things in the original company colours.
The colours shine more brightly in a museum, but a silent Glen Douglas somehow isn't right.
I remember the Glen especially because that was one that I managed to get a footplate ride on. And we'd been to St Andrews and we came back to Perth, and I talked to the footplate inspector at Perth. I was still very young, I have to say, I must have been 14, something like. And he let me travel on the engine after Perth. I sat up on the high seat on the fireman's side of the Glen and kept out the way. It was a splendid experience, something that you can't forget. There were 2 tunnels up there, and they were no more straight than the rest of that railway. And we went battering up through there, the steam and smoke billowing through the cabin, and the fire's glow reflecting off it, and there's nothing like it, you can't forget it. I wouldn't be any place else on earth. It's difficult to recognise it as the same engine. Sitting in a museum, it's accessible, people can see it, it's well looked after. You can't criticise what's happened to it, but at the same time it lacks something. It's not quite a live steam engine.
Such as number 673 Maud, pulling and puffing and belching with its vintage train. Wasteland has become a vintage railway line, and what used to be is living now, so that this is history today. Bowness Railway Station looks 100% Victorian and is 100% Victorian, in that every part of it was made then, even if the different parts had to be brought to this one site from all over Scotland to make one complete piece of Victoriana. So what is it that we are doing with all this preservation? Do we love half living in different ages than our own? Are we becoming a nation of museum keepers, hating to throw anything away? And if we have thrown it away, we seem to love bringing it back again. Steam can be called noisy, smoky, dirty, back-breaking, difficult, costly, archaic. But for lots of people, it has a sort of magic. And currently, those who favour the magic are preserving, conserving, restoring as hard as they can go. It's full steam ahead, just as it used to be.